Have you ever said something that you regretted afterwards? Have you ever sent a text that you wish you had not sent, a day or two later after you cooled off? Have you ever said that you were going to change your food habits and then eaten a bag of Doritos anyway? Have you ever said that you were going to go exercise in the morning, but then found yourself laying in bed not doing it? Today, I am going to teach you perhaps one of the most powerful skills that can be used to be able to shift our emotions, our thoughts, and be able to help our behaviors line up with what we really want to do instead of what we've just been doing in the past. And that skill is called the observer. And by the end of this episode, I'm going to walk you through a very short exercise that will allow you to actually experience what it feels like to step out of your thoughts, emotions, and your physical sensations and to simply observe yourself instead. Because when you can observe what's happening inside of you, you create something incredibly important, and that is space. And that space gives you the ability to choose from a place of wisdom. So, welcome back to the Holistic Therapy Revolution. I'm Beth Miller, and this is where we explore what happens when we go beyond insight alone and we learn how to work with the whole human being: mind, body, emotions, energy, and soul. And one of the fundamental principles of the advanced holistic counseling model that I created is that healing and thriving is not simply just about understanding yourself, that insight has limitations. It's actually instead about developing the ability to work with yourself and to have all of the skills and the tools required to be able to do whole being healing. And the observer is one of the most fundamental and foundational skills that makes this possible, not just in holistic therapy, but frankly in all therapy. So let's talk about what it actually means. What is the observer? So the observer is sometimes called the observing self or the observer self. Sometimes it's called the witness. Sometimes it's called the noticer. Sometimes it's called the watcher. It is the part of you that can step back and notice what's happening inside of you without immediately being consumed by it. This is the part of you that can see what you're doing, but is not actually doing it. Now, when I teach people about the observer, frankly, it's a little freaky for people because all of a sudden they realize, yeah, there is a part of me that can see what I'm thinking. There's a part of me that can notice what I'm feeling. There's a part of me that seems to be able to not be in it, but actually separate from it. And that part is called your observer. And once we teach people to do this, it opens up a field of opportunity and self-empowerment that they have never had before. The observer is also the skill that leads to all other skill usage because we have to be able to observe ourselves in order to be able to use a different skill. For example, we have to be able to observe that we're becoming angry so that we can use breathing in order to be able to reduce that anger. So the observer is always the first skill that we really want to learn when we want to start taking far more control over our thoughts, our feelings, our success, our behavior, and our happiness. So I want you to think about the difference here between these two statements. The first statement is, I'm anxious, versus, I notice that I'm feeling anxious. Now that might sound like a subtle difference, but just hang with me here for a minute. Because psychologically, these are two very different experiences. When you say, I am anxious, you can easily become completely identified with anxiety. That means that we believe we are this thing and that this thing and us are merged, and that gives us a lot less power and control over what to do about it. But when you say, I notice that I'm feeling anxious, you have created a separation. You've created a tiny bit of distance. You are observing the anxiety, which means you are not the anxiety. The anxiety is just something you're experiencing. The thoughts that are anxious are just something you're experiencing. The emotions that you're having are just something you're experiencing. And the physical sensations that you're having related to that stress are just something you're experiencing. The same with the impulses and the other parts of you. They're just things you're experiencing, but they are not the entirety of who you are. Now, here's one of my favorite ways to explain this. And if this feels a little awkward, uncomfortable, abstract, don't worry. Most people seem to feel that way when they're learning more about this observer part of themselves. I'd like you to imagine that your life is a movie. And when you're reactive or impulsive or completely caught up in your thoughts and your emotions, maybe almost all the time, you are just inside the movie. You're running through the scene. You're experiencing everything as if it's directly happening to you. If something triggers you, you react. If someone says something, maybe you become angry. If you have a thought, you believe it. If you feel afraid, you may immediately try to fix whatever you're afraid of. If you want to eat those Doritos, you just do it, even if your intentions in the morning were not to do it. But now I want you to imagine that instead of being inside of the movie, you actually are on the couch and you are watching the movie. You still see everything that's happening. You're still aware of what's happening, but you're not immersed in it. You are on the couch and describing what's happening in the movie. You're observing it from a distance. You can see it. It's real. But you are not so caught up in it that that's the only thing that is real to you. When you're on the couch watching it, you can see everything that's occurring, but from a distance. When your observer isn't activated, you're in the movie. When your observer is activated, when you learn how to tune into that part of you, you are watching the movie. And that shift becomes incredibly powerful. Let's talk about the space that is between triggers and responses. When we are in a more reactive state, the space between a trigger and our response can be incredibly small. It may even seem non-existent. Something happens and we react. Somebody tells us they can't come to our party. We feel mad or upset or shocked. We want to text, we text. Why aren't you coming to my party? But when we activate the observer, we insert another step. The person tells us they're not coming to the party. We observe ourselves. We notice the feelings that we have about it. And we notice that we want to text to react. But instead, we sit back for a minute and we get to choose how we're going to respond. That is the space that becomes afforded by observing. Instead of, I'm furious, so I'm going to send this text, you might notice, wow, I observe this really upsets me. I'm noticing that it makes me furious. I notice that I have this urge to text her immediately to tell her how I feel. And suddenly, now you have choices. Maybe you send the text right away, or maybe you don't. Maybe you wait. Maybe you regulate your emotions first. Maybe you realize that underneath the anger is some hurt. Maybe you take a moment before reacting. Maybe you take a day. Maybe you step back. Maybe you go attend to the party. Maybe you go focus on other things. And then once you have reconnected with full wisdom, not just your emotional mind, that might be when you choose to respond instead. The observer does not tell you what choice to make. It gives you the ability to make choices. Now, here's an important piece. This is really important. The observer in us, this detached part that can see everything, it does not judge. It's not an inner critic. It doesn't say, look how ridiculous you're being. It doesn't say you should or shouldn't feel this way. It doesn't say what's wrong with you. The observer simply says, I notice. I see it. That's it. I notice that I'm angry. I notice that I feel afraid. I notice that I'm thinking about what happened yesterday. I notice that my chest feels tight. I observe that I want to leave right now. I notice that I'm catastrophizing right now. I notice. And therein is a tremendous power in this simple act of noticing. Now, here's the thing also. The observer is not passivity. This is an important misperception that I want to make sure we're really clear on. Some people hear the observer and they think, oh, so I'm just supposed to sit there and do nothing? No, absolutely not. The observer is not about being passive. The goal is not to not take action. The goal is to stop taking reactive action. When you're emotionally flooded, your actions are much more likely to be driven by fear, anger, impulse, old conditionings, and automatic patterns. The same is true when you're trying to make behavioral change, like not eating that bag of Doritos that you said in the morning. You said, tonight when I come home, I'm going to eat just some protein and have some water, and I'm not going to eat a big bag of snacks while I'm watching TV, right? And now we're in the moment, and our best intentions somehow have gone out the window. And we find ourselves just walking over and getting the Doritos and coming back to the couch and going to eat them. And the observer gives us the ability to say, I observe that I really want to eat the Doritos. I observe that I am wanting a snack. I notice that even though I had great intentions this morning, I'm just noticing that I feel like I deserve a reward for all of my hard work today. And all of that noticing and observing now is giving us the space to understand what's happening within us versus just going and getting the Doritos. And it gives us some room to be able to say, you know what? I think I just need to go to bed. I think I'm just really tired. When you can observe yourself first, you have the opportunity to return to a wiser state, and then you can act. Then you can set a boundary. Then you can have the difficult conversation. Then you can leave the relationship or choose to stay in the relationship. Then you can make the phone call. Then you can say no. Then you can take action. But the action is coming from a choice rather than an automated patterned reaction. Now, one of the coolest things about starting to learn that there is an observer in you, a witness, is that you start realizing that you're actually not your thoughts. You start realizing you're actually not your emotions. Prior to this, we feel merged with our thoughts. We think if we have a thought, we are the thought. This is one of the most liberating things that you can learn about the observer. Because you can have a thought without believing it. You can have a thought without acting on it. You can have an emotion without acting on it. You can have an impulse without following it. You can have a physical sensation without panicking about it. You can have fear without allowing that fear to make your decisions. And when you realize, I can just observe what's happening in me, you begin to understand, oh, I am not actually my thoughts. And the same is true for emotions. You can observe your anxiety and then realize you are not just anxiety. You can observe your anger and realize, wait, you're not just simply anger. There is a large part of you that's capable of witnessing it, and that means that you're not it, and this is where all the freedom comes from. If it still sounds abstract, don't worry about it. When we do the example, you're going to see how crystal clear this is, and it's going to make sense. So let's practice. Now I want to actually guide you through this brief exercise where you get to be the observer. And this is the part of the video that you may want to keep returning to every day to let yourself practice being the observer. The stronger you get at the muscle of observing, the more you can use it in hard moments because you've already developed this skill when you were not in crisis. You can use this exercise anytime, but when you're first developing the observer, it may be helpful to do it when you're calm. The more you practice this, the easier it's going to be to access this state in everyday life. So if you're somewhere safe and comfortable, please sit quietly, and then you can close your eyes if that also feels comfortable to you. And then take a nice deep inhale and a great long exhale out. Just breathe for a moment. You may want to take 3 to 4 nice, deep, anchoring breaths into the moment. And the first thing that we're going to do is practice observing and labeling your thoughts. I want you to notice the next thought that comes into your mind. And when you notice it, I want you to say out loud, I observe that I'm thinking ... For example, I observe that I'm thinking about the sound of the cricket chirping in the background. Or I observe that I'm thinking about what I'm going to have for lunch. So every thought that you notice pop into your mind, I want you to say out loud, I observe that I'm thinking, or you can say, I notice that I'm thinking. We're just keeping in mind that we're not trying to stop the thoughts. We don't judge the thoughts. We're not trying to change the thoughts. We're just noticing each one that pops in. And just notice that these thoughts may have come up and then they just go. And they may feel even random. Now we're going to move to the next step. We're going to observe your feelings. You're going to be noticing what emotions you're experiencing right now. Again, without judging, without getting attached to it, just noticing each feeling that you have. So you might say, oh, I notice that I'm feeling anxious, that I won't be good at this. Or I observe that I'm feeling frustrated, that I never learned how to do this when I was a kid. So go ahead and take a moment now and just observe every feeling that you have. There may be many, there may only be one. And label it. I notice that I'm feeling this. I observe that I'm feeling that. Go ahead. Yeah, now we're going to notice or observe your physical body. I'd like you to bring your attention to your body. And I'm going to ask you to slowly scan it from the top of your head all the way down to your toes. And everything that you notice in your physical body, I'd like you to say, I observe this, or I notice that. Again, with no judgment, no critiquing, no evaluating, no getting attached to it. Just notice. So you might say, oh, I notice that my jaw feels clenched. Or you might be noticing that your chest feels a little tight. And each thing that you notice, you say, I notice or I observe. You're not trying to fix anything, you're simply becoming curious. I'll give you a moment to do that. Observe and label everything that you notice in your body. Okay, beautiful. Excellent. Now you were just the observer. You activated being the witness or the observer or the noticer of your whole being. And this is one of the most important skills that you can develop, because once you're tuned into observing yourself, you have more ability to be able to not only not react and to respond, but also to be curious and see that you have thoughts that might be anxious and you have other thoughts. You might have thoughts that are very calm. You might have other thoughts that are pretty neutral, and all of that might be in there. You become more curious about your inner world instead of just believing, if you have an anxious thought, that you're anxious now. And instead of it being like, why am I like this? You can ask instead, I wonder what's happening for me right now, with curiosity, with no judgment, and with the distance that the observer gives us that keeps us wiser and more calm. Instead of, oh, I can't handle that feeling, I can't handle that, you can say, I notice that I'm having really strong feelings about this. Instead of, I'm a failure, it might be, I notice that I'm having the thought that I'm a failure because of this. And that is a completely different relationship with yourself than you may have ever had. Now, here's a couple of hot tips and tricks on how to strengthen your observer. 1, practice makes this automatic. The more frequently you practice observing yourself, the more naturally you will begin to access this state. Eventually, you will not need to go sit down and close your eyes. You can practice that while you're in the middle of a difficult conversation, while you're online at CVS, while you are driving, while you are seeing a client. You can practice it at all times. You may suddenly notice, I notice I'm becoming really defensive. And then that's going to give you a moment to maybe soften that or decide what you want to do with that defensiveness. Now, the more alert your observer becomes, not only the more choice you have, you begin to develop greater awareness of your thoughts, emotions, impulses, body sensations, and behaviors. And what that means is that you're likely to start feeling more peaceful, happier, more in control of your choices, and more able to choose the behaviors that line up with what you really want versus just repeating the old patterns. Now, this is incredibly important. Hint number 3, you must use the words I notice or I observe for every single thing that you notice or observe in your thoughts, your emotions, or in your body. Because that is what keeps you from becoming the thing that creates the distance. So if you forget to do that, it's going to feel different. So make sure that you're saying I notice or I observe when you are labeling a thought, a feeling, or a physical sensation that you're noticing. It's not, I'm having a terrible thought. It's, I notice that I'm having a terrible thought. You're collecting information about yourself. You're becoming the researcher of your own inner world. Now, this is one of the reasons that I consider the observer to be such an important tool in the advanced holistic counseling and coaching model. We're developing the capacity to notice what's happening within us and then choose what happens next for us. And that is a very different goal. And ultimately, developing the observer means that we can use all of the other skills and tools that can help us out. But we first need to notice that we need them. That's the big thing. We first need to be able to notice what's happening within us so that we can use other skills and tools. We want to learn how to work with our minds instead of allowing our minds to automatically run our lives. So this is also what makes holistic counseling different. So here's what I'd like you to try. At least once a day, stop yourself and ask, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What am I noticing in my body? What urges am I having? And when you're labeling each thing you're thinking or feeling or experiencing in your body, start with I notice and then label each one, or I observe and then label each one. Now, you don't have to change anything. All you have to do is notice. Because remember, when you're not observing, you're in the movie. And when you are observing, you're sitting on the couch watching the movie. And from the couch, you can decide what wisdom looks like when it comes from you. So here's my final thought. You really do not have to believe every thought you have. You do not have to obey every emotional experience that you have. You do not have to act on every impulse. You can just observe it. You can witness it. You can breathe. You can create space. And from that space, you get to choose. If this episode helped you, please like, please subscribe. You know how it works. We need your support in order to be able to keep making free videos that we put out there to be able to help all of our folks out there. If you're interested in learning more about the Advanced Holistic Counseling and Coaching Certification, go ahead and check the link below. We teach therapists, doctors, and coaches all of these tools and more. And I will see you on the next episode of the Holistic Therapy Revolution.